The scream wasn't human. It was a jagged, rhythmic tearing of the air that made the coffee in my hand ripple. "My daughter is a predator!" my mom, Audrey, shrieked. "This company is a cover! Ask her what she did in college!" I stood behind the glass of the lobby. "My name is Elsie Ballard. I'm 32 and I built Sky Trace Imaging from a folding table and a used laptop. Beside me, my two biggest commercial clients, men who controlled millions in city contracts, froze mid-sentence. They actually did it. The air in my lungs felt like cold mercury. They didn't just threaten the lie. They brought the match to the building I built. Through the glass, I saw my dad, Gene, nodding solemnly. My cousin Lance stood next to him wearing a Navy company polo he'd had made for a job I never gave him. He was smirking. He thought the sound of my mom's voice was the sound of my surrender. He thought by 5 o'clock I'd be handing him the keys to operations and begging for their silence. I looked at Willard. He wasn't looking at the circus outside. He was looking at me, his face a mask of steady, quiet fury. "Blood is thicker than water," my dad had said at dinner. "You owe us," Lance had sneered. I looked back at the parking lot. Tenny, my white Maltese, was sitting on the passenger seat of my car. Usually, Tenny was a frantic cloud of white fur, but right now he was eerily still. His dark eyes were locked on my mom through the windshield. He didn't bark, he just watched her with a strange, judgmental stillness. He saw what they didn't. I wasn't shaking because I was afraid. I was shaking because the last cord of hesitation had finally snapped. I didn't run out to stop her. I didn't cry. I turned to my receptionist, my voice low and terrifyingly level. "Record everything," I said. "Every word, every gesture. And call building security, not to remove them, but to witness them." I looked at my clients. "I apologize for the noise. In 5 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how Sky Trace handles hostile interference. But first, we have a meeting to finish." I walked into the conference room and shut the door. The revenge wasn't going to be a scream. It was going to be a ledger.
"Are you sure about this, Elsie?" Willard asked, his voice a low anchor in the quiet. Outside, the muffled sound of my mom's hysterics still vibrated against the glass. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the dinner 3 nights ago. My dad, Gene, had poured the wine like it was a peace treaty, but his eyes were all business. He told me family blood was a debt I'd never finished paying. He said I had plenty to spare, and that Lance, who'd been fired for 4 jobs in 2 years, just needed a real chance. He's not asking for a chance, I had thought then. He's asking for a host. "I'm sure," I finally said to Willard. "They think because they share my DNA, they own my desk." My mind drifted to the night before. I was in my dark living room, Tenny curled into a warm ball of white fur against my side. My phone was a frantic pulse of texts from Audrey. "We love you," alternating with "Don't be selfish." Tenny had suddenly sat up, his ears pricked. He didn't growl, he just let out a single sharp huff of air, as if he could sense the malice traveling through the cellular towers. I realized then that my parents didn't see Sky Trace Imaging as a company. They saw it as a family trust they'd been locked out of. To them, Willard was an outsider taking up space that belonged to Lance. To them, my hard work was just good luck that I was obligated to share. "If you move against them, they'll go through with the college story," Willard warned. "I let them," I whispered. I opened my laptop and pulled up the security feed. I watched my dad put a hand on my mom's shoulder, coaching her like a director on a movie set. They weren't grief-stricken parents. They were tacticians. The blood they kept talking about wasn't a bond, it was a leash, and I was about to cut it so clean they'd fall over from the lack of tension. I clicked a folder on my desktop labeled The Inheritance Clause. It wasn't full of memories, it was full of every dime I'd repaid them over the last decade and the NDA they'd signed 5 years ago in exchange for my college silence. They forgot that when you sell a secret, you don't own the leverage anymore. You just own the receipt.
You remember what I did to get here, Willard? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was looking at a framed photo on my desk from 10 years ago, me exhausted in a basement apartment with a space heater. The memories of college didn't feel like a scandal, they felt like a survival movie. Audrey and Jean had cut me off the second I chose a business major over the medical degree they'd mapped out. If you want to be a boss, Elsie, you can pay for the privilege, my dad had said. I remembered the winter of my junior year in Minneapolis, working 3 jobs, living on protein bars and tap water. While Lance was backpacking through Europe on my parents' retirement account, I was walking 3 miles in the snow to networking events. The incident they were weaponizing was a lie built from the scraps of someone else's story. A girl in my dorm had a disciplinary case. I was the one who walked her to the clinic at 2 a.m. I sat with her in the dean's office. My parents heard rumors and twisted them. In their version, I was the one in trouble. It was laughable. We didn't have influence, and they certainly hadn't given me a dime. They're plagiarizing someone else's trauma to steal my company, I said. I looked at the security feed. Tenny was still in the car, his small white head tracking my mom's movements like a tiny, silent judge. Every time she shouted another lie, Tenny's ears would flatten just a fraction. He knew her voice from the holidays where she'd corner me to ask for loans for Lance. I opened my laptop and started a new folder, Exhibit A. I didn't need to defend my past, I just needed to document their present. I pulled up my dad's text from an hour ago. Make the right choice, Elsie. Blood is thicker than a reputation. Willard, I said, eyes reflecting the glow of the screen. Call the campus registrar. I want my transcripts and my employment records from 2016 to 2020. Every hour I worked, every cent I earned. If they want to talk about my college years, let's give them the full bibliography. Because when you survive on tap water and grit while your family is off on a self-discovery tour, you don't just build a business, you build an armor of receipts.
The conference room felt like a glass cage. Outside, my mom, Audrey, had moved from screaming to a theatrical, hunched-over sob against the hood of my car. I watched the security feed. Tenny hadn't moved from the passenger seat. The little white Maltese was a stark contrast to the dark leather, his head tilted as he watched her performance. To anyone else, he was a pampered pet. To me, he was a silent recording device of every time my mom had borrowed my car and forgotten to bring it back, or the time she'd lectured me about Lance's credit card debt. Elsie, Willard said by the window, the police are turning the corner. You sure you want them to see her like this? I didn't put her there, Willard. She chose the stage. I looked at the dog on the screen. Tenny's ears suddenly pinned back. He'd seen him. My dad, Gene, was walking toward the car with a heavy, leather-bound folder. He tapped on the glass, signaling my mom to move. The soft, emotional weapon was stepping back so the hard, legal threat could take the lead. I thought about the time in college when I had the flu, the real bone-shaking kind. I'd called home, not for money, but just to hear a voice. My dad told me to call back when I wasn't being dramatic because they were taking Lance to a theme park. I had hung up, shivering in a basement apartment, realizing then that my blood was only valuable when it was being used to transfuse someone else. Now, Gene was standing in my parking lot pretending he held the keys to my reputation. They think I'm still that girl in the basement, I whispered. I clicked a button on my desk, activating the external intercom. Dad? My voice projected across the parking lot, amplified and metallic. The police are 30 seconds out. If you open that folder, you're not just trespassing, you're committing extortion on a recorded line. Choose very carefully what happens next. On the screen, my dad froze. He looked up at the building, squinting against the Minneapolis sun. Tenny let out a single sharp bark inside the car, a muffled yip that seemed to punctuate my warning. Because even the dog knows when you spend a decade surviving on your own, you don't fear a folder. You fear the person who thinks they can still make you shiver. The police cruiser pulled into the lot, its lights painting my parents in rhythmic flashes of red and blue. My dad, Gene, didn't drop the folder. He tucked it tighter, his jaw set in that stubborn line I'd spent 20 years trying to soften. "Time jump," I whispered to the empty room. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the last time I'd let them truly inside my life. I'd just landed my first city contract, a structural mapping project for the Minneapolis Skyway. I'd invited them to dinner, thinking finally my success would earn their respect. Instead, Audrey spent the meal scrolling through pictures of Lance's latest failed cryptocurrency scheme. "He's a dreamer, Elsie," she'd said, her touch feeling like a shackle. "You're so industrial. You have the money to help him. It's what family does." My heart sank. They didn't see a triumph. They saw a bank. When I told them no, my dad laid his fork down with a metallic clink. "If you turn your back on blood, don't be surprised when blood turns its back on you." Now the debt collector had arrived. I watched the officer step out. My mom shifted her weight, preparing to play the victim for a new audience. But Tenny was the one who broke the tension. The small Maltese scrambled to the dashboard, his tiny paws scratching against the glass. He let out a flurry of sharp, insistent barks. He wasn't barking at the police. He was barking at Lance, who was trying to slip a SkyTrace imaging lanyard over his neck while the officers were distracted. "He really thinks he's punching in," Willard said with disgust. "He's not punching in," I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. "He's trespassing, and he's doing it on camera." I walked toward the lobby doors. The 5-year truce was over. If they wanted to play in the dirt of my past, they were about to find out I was the one who knew where all the pipes were buried. Because when you build your own foundation from the mud, you make sure you're the only one with the blueprints.
The glass doors of the lobby hissed open, and the humid Minneapolis air hit me like a physical weight. My mom, Audrey, saw me first. She didn't stop her theatrical sobbing. She just dialed the volume up, her eyes darting to the police officers to make sure they were watching her heartbreak. "Elsie, tell them," she wailed. "Tell them your own cousin is just trying to help you. Tell them Willard is the one poisoning your mind." I didn't look at her. I looked at Lance. He was standing by the squad car, fiddling with the navy blue lanyard around his neck. The SkyTrace imaging logo was slightly crooked, the embroidery cheap and shiny, a knockoff he'd commissioned from a strip mall kiosk. "Nice touch, Lance," I said, my voice cutting through my mom's noise. "I own the trademark on that. My legal team calls that willful infringement and impersonation of a corporate officer." Lance's smirk faltered. "It's a family business, Elsie. You're just the one with the name on the lease." "It's a private corporation," I corrected him. I turned to the officer. "Officer, my name is Elsie Ballard. I am the sole owner. These individuals have been asked to leave 3 times. My dad, Gene, stepped forward with the leather folder. "We're here to discuss a personnel matter, officer. Sensitive conduct. We have evidence." "He has a folder of lies," I interrupted. I pointed to the car. Tenny was still on the dashboard, his barking now a steady, rhythmic alarm. "Is that your dog, ma'am?" the officer asked. "He is," I said, "and if you look at the passenger seat, you'll see my work tablet. They took it from my home office while I was at the gym. That lanyard isn't the only thing they stole." The look on my dad's face shifted from authority to a flicker of genuine panic. He hadn't expected me to count the silver while the house was on fire. He thought I'd be too busy defending my shame to notice the theft. "Check the folder, officer," I said, my voice like ice. "Check the tablet. Then ask them why they're wearing my brand while they try to burn it down." The sky over Minneapolis turned a bruised purple. My dad, Gene, gripped the leather folder so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at me with that cold, predatory disappointment. "You're really going to do this, Elsie?"
he hissed. "If I open this folder, there is no coming back. Skytrace will be a punchline by morning." "It's already a punchline, Jean," I snapped, "because you're standing in the middle of it." My mom, Audrey, let out a fresh, piercing wail and threw herself against my car. Her hand slapped the window right where Tenny was perched. The sudden thud startled him. He tumbled into the footwell, a tiny, pained whimper escaping him. That sound, that whimper from a creature that had done nothing but love me, was the detonator. 10 years of fixing Lance's messes, 10 years of being the practical one who didn't need a hug because I had a spreadsheet. It all roared to the surface. "Get away from my car!" I screamed. The force of it made the officer jump. "Get away from my dog, my staff, and my life!" "Elsie, you're being emotional," my mom started, her eyes instantly drying. "I am being accurate," I yelled, stepping into her space. "You didn't come to save me. You came because you're broke, because Lance is a failure and you've run out of retirement money. You're not protecting my reputation, you're holding it for ransom." I turned to the officer, my chest heaving, tears finally blurring my vision, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. He has a stolen tablet. He has a folder of fabricated stories, and that woman just assaulted my property. Arrest them. I want them off my land. The silence that followed was absolute. My dad looked at me, and for the first time in 32 years, I saw something in his eyes besides arrogance. He saw that I wasn't scared of the story anymore. I was the one writing the ending. Because when you stop being the reliable one and start being the owner, the balance of power doesn't just shift, it shatters.
"Arrest them," my dad, Jean, repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "You'd put your own mother in a squad car over a misunderstanding? It ceased to be a misunderstanding the moment you threatened me at dinner," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice I used for structural cracks in a foundation. I looked at the warehouse, the black steel, the glass. They saw a jackpot. I saw 3 years sleeping on a cot because I couldn't afford rent and drone insurance. I saw winter nights in the Minneapolis skyways, fingers numb on thermal sensors, while Audrey called to complain I hadn't sent enough money for Lance's startup fees. I built Skytrace imaging out of stubborn refusal to fail. I worked until my eyes bled. I navigated bureaucracy while they navigated guilt trips. "I didn't get lucky, Dad," I said, stepping closer. "I outworked everyone you ever compared me to, especially him." I jerked a thumb at Lance, who was trying to hide his fake lanyard under his chin. Inside the car, Tenny had stopped barking. He was sitting perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on me, the silent, furry witness to the grind. He'd seen the tears I hid from everyone else. He'd seen the moment I almost gave up, and he was the only one who didn't ask for a piece of the profit. "The hard work wasn't the business, Jean," I whispered. "The hard work was pretending I had a family that cared about anything other than what I could provide." The officer cleared his throat. "Sir, step away from the vehicle. Hand over the folder." My mom's face contorted into pure venom. The loving mother was gone. The predator had shown its teeth. "Wait until the papers get a hold of what we have," she hissed. "You'll be begging us to take the company off your hands just to make the noise stop." "I don't mind the noise," I said, turning my back on her. "I'm a drone pilot. I'm used to things buzzing in my ear before I swat them down. Because when you've spent your life navigating storms, a little bit of wind doesn't scare you. It just tells you which way to steer." The parking lot lights hummed, a low-frequency buzz vibrating inside my skull. My dad, Jean, finally handed the folder to the officer, his movements stiff. He looked at me with cold, calculating distance. "You're making a mistake, Elsie," he said. "This is Minneapolis. Stories travel faster than police reports." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. While they were staging a riot, I had been building a digital fortress. 2 hours ago, I'd sent a BCC email to my board, my insurance carriers, and the city's ethics auditor, a security disclosure statement. I attached screenshots of the defamation posts and audio from the coffee shop where Lance said, "Nobody cares what's true." I framed it as coordinated corporate espionage. I turned my private shame into their professional liability. I looked at the car. Tenny was watching me, his small white face pressed against the glass like a ghost. He'd been the only one in my house when I was recording those calls, the only one who didn't judge the tremor in my voice. "Willard," I called out. My operations director stepped from the shadows. "The server logs are locked, Elsie. IT has a mirrored copy of every communication from your stolen tablet. We tracked the IP. They tried to log into the payroll system from a Starbucks 2 blocks away." My mom, Audrey, went pale. She looked at Lance, who suddenly looked very small in his fake polo. "Payroll?" I whispered, a jagged laugh catching in my throat. "You didn't even wait for the scandal to break. You were already trying to cut yourselves a check." The secret wasn't my past. The secret was that I grew up in a house of thieves, and I was the only one who learned how to build a vault. "Officer," I said, pointing to Lance. "That man is wearing my intellectual property, carrying stolen hardware, and just attempted to bypass my company's financial encryption. That moves this beyond a family matter and into a felony. Because when you spend your life being the reliable one, they forget that you're the one who knows exactly where the safety switch is located."
The air in the parking lot felt like a thin wire about to snap. My dad, Gene, tried to snatch the tablet from the back seat as the officer reached for it, but his fingers slipped. The screen stayed lit, reflecting a series of outgoing emails, all addressed to my top clients containing the scandal they'd spent years polishing. "It's too late, Elsie!" my mom, Audrey, shrieked, her face a twisted mask of triumph. "The emails are sent. Your reputation is a ghost. You should have just given Lance the job." I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at her. I looked at the digital clock on the warehouse wall. 5:02 p.m. "Check your phone, Lance," I said. Lance pulled his phone from his pocket. His smirk didn't just vanish, it evaporated. He turned the phone toward my dad, his face drained of color. "What is it?" Gene barked. I took a step forward, the gravel crunching under my heels like bone. "I knew you'd go for the payroll and the client list, so I didn't just lock you out, I mirrored it. Every email you sent didn't go to my clients. It went to a dummy server I set up 3 weeks ago when you first started making threats at dinner." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the muffled scratching of Tenny against the window. The little Maltese was watching the collapse of my family with a steady, unblinking gaze. "But that's not the best part," I continued, eyes locked on my dad's. "The send button on that dummy server was linked to a mass distribution BCC, not to my clients, to the entire church board, the local news tip line, and every one of your distinguished friends." I leaned in, my breath hitching. "I didn't send them the lie, Gene. I sent them the audio of you and Mom rehearsing the extortion in your kitchen last night. Tenny's collar has a high-fidelity GPS tracker with a built-in mic. You shouldn't have let him sleep in the mudroom while you were planning my funeral." My mom's knees buckled. She hit the pavement with a dull thud. "You ruined us," she whispered. "You ruined your own parents." "No," I said. "I just stopped paying for the curtains you used to hide the rot."
The parking lot was no longer a private stage. It had become a fishbowl. 2 of my high-profile clients, the old money of Minneapolis, were standing by the glass doors, their expressions oscillating between shock and deep disgust. They weren't looking at me, they were looking at Audrey, still on her knees, and Jean staring at the folder as if it were a live grenade. "Is there a problem, Elsie?" one client asked, his voice booming across the asphalt. He looked at Lance in that navy knockoff polo. And who is this? He's been telling my assistant he's the new head of your operations. The silence that followed was more brutal than any scream. Lance looked at his feet, the sky trace lanyard suddenly looking like a noose. "He's a trespasser," I said. I walked to the car and opened a door. Tenny didn't wait. The white Maltese leaped into my arms, his tiny heart racing against my palm. He licked my chin once, a grounding swipe of wet fur, before turning to growl, a low, vibrating sound at my father. "You're going to regret this, Elsie," Jean whispered as the officer led him toward the squad car. "You've aired the family laundry in the middle of the street. Nobody wins a fight like this." "I'm not fighting you, Jean," I said, clutching Tenny. "I'm outshining you. You wanted a scene? You got one. Now they know who you are, too." I watched as the police took statements. My receptionist was pointing at the cameras. Willard was handing over the thumb drive of the mirrored server logs. The powerful family was being dismantled by the people Jean called expendable. Audrey looked up, her makeup streaked. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "In front of everyone?" "Because you didn't care who was watching when you called me a predator," I said. "You only care about the audience when they stop clapping for you." I put Tenny back in his carrier and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't stay to watch them be driven away. I had a company to run, and for the first time in my life, the only blood I had to worry about was the kind keeping my own heart beating. Because when you stop being a reservoir for their greed, you finally have enough pressure to fuel your own future.
The hum of the Minneapolis skyline at night felt different that night. From my office window, the city lights looked like a circuit board I had finally learned how to program. The warehouse was quiet. The staff had gone home, and the police tape had been cleared away, leaving only the faint, dark oil stains of my father's car. I sat at my desk, once a folding table, now a glass-topped executive station, and felt a hollowness that wasn't quite sadness. It was the feeling of a heavy limb finally being amputated. I looked down at Tenny, curled asleep on his sheepskin rug. His white fur was peaceful now, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He was the only one in that car who didn't lie. He was the only one who didn't want a piece of my soul in exchange for loyalty. I realized then that my parents were right about one thing: blood is thick. It's thick enough to choke you. It's thick enough to blind you to the fact that the people who raised you can also be the ones who plot your ruin. But family isn't a DNA test. It's a choice made every day to protect what someone else has built. Willard was family. My team, who watched my world catch fire without flinching, was family. Audrey, Jean, and Lance, they were just creditors who had finally run out of debt to collect. The legal filings are public now. The scandal they tried to build turned into a case study for corporate extortion. I didn't save my family today. I saved the woman who had to sleep on a warehouse floor to keep her lights on. Standing up for yourself isn't a betrayal of your blood, it's a restoration of your dignity. If people call you heartless only after your boundaries start costing them their unearned access, it just means they were benefiting from your silence. I am Elsie Ballard. I don't hide in basements anymore, and I certainly don't negotiate with arsonists, even if they're the ones who gave me my name, because the architecture of a new life requires a foundation that isn't built on the shifting sands of guilt, but on the solid rock of your own worth.